Bienvenue.
Welcome to you all. Welcome to the 8th meeting of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights, Subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons. Pursuant to the standing order, the subcommittee is meeting to continue its study of people who are internally and externally displaced worldwide. Our meeting today will take place in hybrid format pursuant to the regulations. Witnesses will be appearing sometimes with Zoom.
Members, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channels for interpretation, floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Ce mercredi, le 10 décembre, est la journée internationale.
Wednesday, the 10th of December, is the International Day of Human Rights. I would personally like to thank my colleagues who sit on the subcommittee for their hard work and their devotion to improving the human condition.
Each week is a reminder that even if borders and nationality structure our identity, security and prosperity, we are all human beings in search of dignity, respect and justice. We all have the same goals and needs, and all have more in common than the opposite. Thank you. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter le bienvenue à nos témoins.
I would now like to welcome our witnesses, Professor François Audet, Director of the Canadian Observatory on Humanitarian Crises and Action from the University of Quebec in Montreal.
Dr. Christina Clark-Kazak, Professor Public and International Affairs from University of Ottawa. From Canadian Council for Refugees, Asma Faizi, President by video conference. Gauri Srinivasan, Co-Executive Director. From United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we have Tracy Mulfair, representative in Canada, and Azadeh Tamjid, Senior Legal Advisor, and we are waiting for Ms. Dimon to show up soon, hopefully. And now I would like to give every one of you 5 minutes as introduction, and we would like to start with the Prof. François Audet. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen and committee members, thank you for inviting me. I am a professor of management studies at the University of Quebec at Montreal. My presentation is based on a memorandum, a presentation to this committee, and is based on 6 years of a study of the migratory crisis. I have several objectives to describe the characteristics of major migratory channels, to describe the criminality which exploits migrants, and to situate this dynamics within a geopolitical context in order to help to inform Canadian foreign policy. So Darien region, which is situated between Colombia and Panama and reaches to Guatemala, is one of the most dangerous migratory channels in the world. It is characterized by extreme violence. Criminality is increasing. It's important to remember that this crisis goes far beyond Central America. Haiti, Cuba also are experiencing displacement without precedent. These countries represent between 60 and 70% of the migrants in the area. The International Organization of Migrants said that in 24-25, many nationalities are involved. I have heard of people from China, from India, from parts of Africa, from really just about anywhere in the world. My research shows that there are 4 things I'd like to make you aware of. First of all, these corridors have become true criminal economies. These corridors in Central America are transactional corridors. Migrants have to pay for each stage of their journey: taxis, customs, police corruption. All these things have been captured by criminal organizations. And there are also various armed bands. All these groups use extortion as a principal source of income in various sectors. Migration and exploiting migration is the most lucrative form of a business. And also, it's one of the main drivers of migration. These criminals are not satisfied with simply controlling these people, but they provoke actively displacements in order to increase the number of people who are liable to being exploited. For example, in some shanty towns and some of the poorest areas, they will use violent extortion. Secondly, violence is the central strategy of these groups. This could be abduction, threats, and sexual violence. In 2023, Doctors Without Borders said that there was 1 case of sexual violence recorded every 3 hours. This is part of how they pay for their passage. Many women are victims to sexual assault during their travel. Some of the poorest countries in South America are not able to welcome these massive flows of human beings. And social institutions just can't handle it. This leads to the closure or even to the militarization of the border, of the American border under President Trump. So these people rest for longer periods of time in local communities. Fourth, contrary to a widely accepted idea, in some cases of violence, this violence will increase migration rather than diminish it. There are investments, for example, in infrastructure. You have 20 seconds, sir. Now, some of the things that are meant to help people generate other opportunities for extortion. I have 4 recommendations. I will mention them quickly. Support for research, to base research on human rights, to help support regional efforts, and to help Canada become a tool of stabilization and not extra fuel for criminality. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Christina Clark-Kazak, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Try to respect the time, please. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais faire la présentation en anglais, mais je peux répondre.
Thank you, Chair. I will make my presentation in English.
Situation of internally and externally displaced peoples globally, and then I'll focus in on what Canada can do to facilitate solutions. In terms of the global overview, according to our colleagues here at the UN Refugee Agency, more than 1 in every 70 people globally are displaced. The root causes of this displacement include violence, conflict, human rights abuses, climate change, and environmental disasters. Over 71% of people in forced migration are hosted in low and middle income countries of the global south. In terms of internally displaced, they make up the largest percentage of people in forced migration globally, around 67.8 million. Because internally displaced people are citizens, they should benefit from the same legal rights and protections as any other citizen. However, some governments do not have the capacity or the political will to uphold these rights. The guiding principles on internal displacement build on applicable human rights and humanitarian law. However, country visits by the UN Special Rapporteur regularly highlight human rights concerns. For example, Sudan has nearly 10 million internally displaced people who face severe risk of famine and grave human rights violations. Other internally displaced people are trapped behind closed borders. For example, the majority of Gaza is under a displacement order, with 90% of the 2.1 million people displaced. Borders remain closed, preventing Gazans from fleeing the constant bombardment and from sufficient aid and medical support reaching civilians. Turning now to external displacement, if a displaced person crosses an international border, they have the right to make an asylum claim under the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. By mid-2025, there were 8.4 million asylum seekers. However, states, including Canada, are increasingly limiting access to asylum through detention, pushbacks, safe third country agreements, and externalization policies. These policies, as Professor O'Day elaborated, push people into more dangerous journeys and into precarious legal status. So far this year, over 1,000 people have died in the Mediterranean Sea. Despite draconian border enforcement policies and illegal deportations, the United States still has over 11 million undocumented people. There is a growing tendency to grant temporary protection rather than permanent refugee status. For example, 4.3 million Ukrainians in Europe are under temporary protection. Most of the approximately 300,000 people who came to Canada under the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel must apply to extend their status because it was only granted for 3 years. The UN agency estimates that there are 36.4 million refugees. Again, most of these are in the global south, and many of them are in protracted refugee situations awaiting a durable solution. However, rich countries like Canada are reducing our resettlement pathways, including the current freeze on groups of 5 private sponsorship. In terms of recommendations to this committee, the Government of Canada should take proactive measures to resolve these displacement issues. To address the root causes, we must first pursue diplomatic interventions to ensure human rights are respected and to negotiate peaceful resolutions to conflict. Second, we need more bold climate change action to address environmental displacement both in Canada and globally. Third, we need to ensure corporate social responsibility of Canadian companies, such as mining companies in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo who are complicit in forced evictions. Now addressing the ongoing internal-external displacement in terms of the manifestation of these displacement, the Government of Canada must first ensure sustained development and humanitarian assistance for people in situations of displacement, particularly in the context of the closure of USAID. The need is dire. Second, we need to increase our resettlement numbers and encourage international cooperation to find durable solutions to protracted displacement. Third, abolish the Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S. and reconsider Bill C-12, both of which severely restrict the right to asylum. And finally, where people are trapped behind closed borders, Canada must waive biometric requirements or cooperate with allies to facilitate paperwork. Merci beaucoup pour l'occasion de présenter. Au plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer your questions.
Madame Asma Faizi, by video conference, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Please go.
Thank you. CCR is the national voice for more than 200 member agencies that work with, from, and for refugee and immigrant communities across Canada. This perspective is critical in the current global context, where forcibly displaced populations around the world, both internally and externally, are growing due to recurring conflicts, political instability, persecution, and climate change. Yet analyses of displacement frequently focus on immediate triggers and short-term responses with little attention to the underlying factors that drive people from their homes and the role that countries like Canada are playing in driving those very forces. This narrow approach has too often justified increased securitization, interdiction, offshore processing, detention, and border-focused policies aimed at preventing displaced persons from ever reaching safety. A major concern for CCR at this time of growing need is the declining commitment from many countries to refugees and to supporting internally displaced people. We are seeing a rise in authoritarianism, fascism, xenophobia, and hate, whether in countries far away like Afghanistan, where I am from, or with our neighbor to the south, which has completely suspended its resettlement programs and has now halted its internal system for offering asylum. In the face of global trends that are narrowing the scope of protection, we ask, how will Canada respond? The federal government came to power at a moment when Canadians felt vulnerable in the face of political and economic threats from the Trump administration. Our collective instinct then was to put our elbows up, to defend Canadian values, and to forge our own path. Yet today, the signs are troubling. Canada is not stepping up, we are stepping back. One of the clearest indicators of this backsliding is a precipitous drop in resettlement commitments with Canada's immigration levels. This year marks the 10th anniversary of Canada's welcome to Syrians fleeing conflict, a moment that galvanized the country and reminded the world of who we are. We are still that country, but we must stand up for those same principles. Instead, we are seeing steps in the opposite direction. The Group of 5 sponsorship pathways frozen. The private sponsorship of refugees program is being slashed, despite being one of the most respected and effective programs in the world. Even government-assisted refugee numbers are being reduced. Refugees, particularly those in Africa, continue to face significant longer wait times than others, as highlighted in a recent CCR report, including the worrisome case of our inadequate response to the Sudan crisis, as mentioned by previous witnesses. These decisions misread the capacity of Canadians. Canadians are ready to sponsor. They are waiting. The limitations are not public will, they are government policy. Compounding these policy choices are the dangerous narratives that have taken over the past 2 years across all levels of government. These narratives wrongly blame current pressures on housing and social systems on immigration and refugees. This is not only false, it is dangerous. It undermines public confidence in the immigration and refugee system and unfairly targets those who have always contributed to Canada's social and economic fabric. We invite you as members of Parliament to help push back against these narratives. CCR, together with over 100 partners, has launched a national public campaign, We're Better Together, to reignite public support for immigration and to remind us of who we are and who we can be. We urge the committee to recommend the need for a positive narrative from government because people in Canada expect our leaders to carry on our proud legacy of welcoming refugees. I'll pass it on to Gary now.
Please, Madame Gary, have the floor. You could have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Asma, et merci vraiment au comité pour votre engagement.
And thank you, committee, for your commitment to this very important issue. This includes Canada. I will be concentrating my remarks on the issues having to do with the challenges for asylum seekers.
Forcibly displaced, and anyone who is at or within our borders has the right to seek asylum here. Let us remember, however, that Canada receives a tiny fraction, less than 2% of asylum seekers worldwide. We also have a world-respected system for hearing those claims. It is a system, however, that is being denigrated by many recently. But when the facts are allowed to surface, the picture is quite clear. We have a robust and thorough asylum system, one that includes a substantive security check and one where each case is assessed on the evidence at an independent tribunal at the Immigration Refugee Board. The vast majority of refugee claimants, 80% in this year, are found to be refugees in need of protection from persecution. Canadians can be proud of that. The system can always be improved, but it works well. It works for refugees and it works for Canadians. Let us recall that the right to asylum and to due process are rights protected under our Charter and international law. These are rights that you or I would want upheld if our families were in danger. I just want to flag 2 major concerns about how these rights for the forcibly displaced are in jeopardy now in Canada. through both the Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S., or the STCA, as I will call it, and the current direction of Bill C-12, which is still before the House. The STCA has been a long-standing element of the overall system for how Canada deals with asylum claims, turning back most refugees if they cross from the U.S. on the grounds that the asylum system works well there. This has actually never been true for many refugees because of deep problems with the U.S. system, as the CCR has long held. But the agreement now is absurd, members. The U.S. has completely suspended its asylum system such as it was. People, even those with status in the U.S., are being grabbed in unmarked cars, they are being held in detention, they are being deported to third countries or their home country where they may face danger or death. The rule of law has effectively gone out the window. It is an uncomfortable truth for the Canadian government, but we cannot bury our head in the sand. As a country, already we are reevaluating the Canada-U.S. relationship in a whole range of areas, as a partner for trade, as a partner for defense. We must also reevaluate the basis for partnership in matters of human rights and refugees. At this crucial moment in history, we need to defend and strengthen Canada's system for asylum protection in ways that are consistent with our values and with international standards, and in a way that builds on the skills and institutions already in place in this country, rather than copying other countries or creating wasteful duplicatory structures. Unfortunately, it is the latter that is now reflected in Bill C-12. And you are not tasked with this bill, and I will not make specific recommendations or go into the details here. But I do want to say for the record at this very important Committee for Human Rights that the bill moves Canada away from human rights standards and norms of procedural fairness for asylum seekers. This includes, for example, the right to a hearing before being deported, the right to an appeal, because decision makers make mistakes. This bill, CCR would hold, will not survive a constitutional challenge as currently drafted. And we look forward to discussion of the bill in the Senate, where we expect it will go soon. But we do hope that you as a committee can consider future opportunities to study essentially the human rights implications of new trends and directions in Canada's immigration and refugee system, because it is an approach that currently will see billions spent to shift us as a country towards a U.S.-style machinery, ICE-style machinery, to remove vulnerable people in violation of their rights, instead of using a fraction of those resources to ensure due process for those seeking protection and setting refugees up for success as future Canadians. We know we can do better, and we look forward to working with you on it. Merci.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Madame Tracy Mulfer to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
I'd like to begin by thanking you for your focus on the causes of displacement across the world and potential solutions to them, particularly at the current time when discussions on these issues are far too few and divisions are far too many. UNHCR works in 130 countries to respond to and protect refugees, forcibly displaced communities, and stateless, and help them to find solutions. Currently, there are more than 117 million people who have been forced to flee due to war, conflict, and persecution worldwide. This is a massive figure. Really, it's about the same as the entire population of the Philippines. And it is a figure that, for the first time in a decade, actually decreased in 2025. 1 year ago, we saw the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. Since then, 1 million people living as refugees have returned home from abroad, and a further 2 million displaced people within the country have returned to their homes to restart their lives. Yet, Syria remains a country shattered by war. Hope is fragile. For families to return, they will need safety, a way to earn an income, schools for their children, the things that we take for granted here. But there's an important point to underline in this, and why I'm talking about Syria. It's that when safe in countries, when safe to return is the preferred option for most refugees. Finding peaceful solutions to conflict will always be the best way to ease displacement challenges we are facing and stop people from moving. Unfortunately, Syria remains a bright spot in the world. As war and violence continue to drive displacement, cuts to life-saving aid are making everything worse. Consider what's happening in Sudan right now, the largest displacement crisis in the world. More than 12 million people have been forced to flee. Over 4 million people are living in neighboring countries as refugees. Recently, al-Fashir in the Darfur region faced 500 days under siege before falling to the rapid support forces, triggering a brutal wave of violence. Neighboring countries like Chad generously opened their borders and offered safety to those forced to flee, but the services available are not able to meet the needs. Many of those arriving are deeply traumatized, and not even basic assistance is available, let alone health and psychosocial support services for women and girls who have faced unspeakable violence. This situation is not unique to Chad. Humanitarian workers are doing what we can, but we're stretched thin worldwide. In the past year, UNHCR's global budget decreased by 25%, forcing us to make extremely difficult choices and end critical life-saving programs. As a result, 11.6 million people are not getting the help they need. When people are left without life-saving aid or opportunities, the risk they face multiplies. When displacement spreads, it weakens fragile states. Left unchecked, these crises spill across borders, drive migration, and disrupt trade and investment opportunities. This means more children recruited into armed groups, sexual exploitation, human smuggling. The solution is not to point the blame at those forced to flee. Rather, the more assistance which frontline neighboring countries receive, the better they are able to host refugees, reducing the likelihood of dangerous onward movements. Investing in humanitarian aid is a practical, cost-effective contribution to regional and global security. Canada's support of UNHCR makes a measurable difference, enabling us to deliver frontline, life-saving support and solutions where few others can. For decades, through successive governments, we have relied on Canada's leadership and support in helping refugees worldwide. Your country sets an important example and serves as a model to other nations. As you consider the challenges of displacement in this difficult moment, we need Canada to continue to be an advocate for peace. It is also imperative this committee recognizes the vital role of humanitarian funding to provide safety for people forced to flee, prevent further displacement, and support people to go back home when they're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Madame Azadi Tamjidi to take the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Sorry, those were the total of the remarks for UNHCR.
Ms. Diamond is not here, so I thank you all for your introduction. And now I would like to start the first round of question and answer. Who is number one? Shabilov. Would like to invite Mr. Shabilov to take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for providing your perspectives and testimony on a very difficult topic that is obviously gripping the world over. The displacement of people internally and internationally has caused national systems, international systems to breach in many ways, overrun with issues of integration failure, successful vertical mobility for people who come into the country, asylum measures that have become discordant in various jurisdictions, and you all did a wonderful job at describing some of those issues. I was wondering if I might be able to direct Chair my first questions to Asma Faizi. Having spent some time in Afghanistan myself and watching that crisis unfurl with the disastrous decision made by the Biden administration of withdrawal, we see several consequences for how Afghans have had to deal with their own displacement internally and in the region. So, Madam Faizi, if I might ask you to start, what can you share about the internal Afghan displacement that has unfurled over the last years since 2021?
So thank you for that question. The situation that Afghanistan is right now is not a sort of a culmination of what has happened since 2021, but it's a culmination of a almost half century of conflict, of violence, of lack of human rights protection, climate change, and natural disasters. So, unfortunately for Afghanistan, it's not only human-made, but also natural disasters that have caused the state in which the Afghan people are right now. And the state is very dire. Unfortunately, the focus from Afghanistan shifted to other regions of the world, and people don't realize that Afghanistan is still undergoing an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. And so the situation internally is very bad. The economy has collapsed. The infrastructure, both healthcare and education, is on the brink. And then, in addition to these, I think one of the very concerning things that are happening inside Afghanistan right now is the forced deportation of Afghans from Pakistan and Iran, particularly, but also from other regions of the world, where they are potentially including the U.S., are deporting Afghans forcibly back into Afghanistan. And so in the past year, the statistics or the numbers are that it's close to 1.2 million people that have been forced back into Afghanistan. So you can imagine the dire situation Afghanistan was in at the beginning, and then on top of it, there is this additional pressures coming from these people that have been forcibly deported back into Afghanistan. And it's really important for the Canadian government to pay attention to what is going on in Afghanistan. I think at other times people have not paid attention, and negative outcomes have flown and have come out of that. And so we'd really hope that the Canadian government takes what's going on inside Afghanistan more seriously.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to pick up on, you raised so many important issues here. I wanted to pick up on one for Afghans who are inside the country today, and I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to platform this and give them a voice through you. What kind of options do they have to escape into neighboring countries? Are there any safe options? Obviously, they live in a very dangerous neighborhood with hostile regimes that, at the expense of the Afghan people, keep extending their own interests for hegemony and instability. Could you give us a sense from your perspective on the people you talk to in Afghanistan, whether it's crossing east, west, north? What options do Afghans really have internally to leave their country?
Well, the options are not that many, including now with, again, these forced deportations. So, previously people could go to Pakistan or to Tajikistan or to Iran for safety. But in the past year and a half, because of the sort of political instability, the relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and also these many of the issues that most of the presenters here have spoken about the policies of externalization, of deportations, of keeping people away from seeking safety, has really closed the doors on many Afghans. Our organization, I personally get calls all the time from people who want to come to Canada, who want to come leave Afghanistan, but there really are no options. Because, again, for those that are able to make it to Pakistan, they're afraid of being deported back. For similarly to Tajikistan, to Turkey. So the options have really decreased. And unfortunately, Canada is contributing to this, because one of the pathways for a lot of Afghans who have family members back home was the Group of Five private sponsorship program. That has been halted, and also the private sponsorship program has been severely slashed for the next year, and so there are less and less opportunities for people that are in severe need, and it's very, very concerning what's going on in the U.S. and how they have targeted all Afghans. So again, not only inside Afghanistan, but Afghans are suffering all over the world.
If I might, we have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to drill further into this. When you look at the Afghan borders, many of their neighbors think it's pliable, particularly their eastern border. We know there's many stories that you've definitely heard. These include former colleagues of mine, people who I think of very fondly and very closely, who have had to make a very difficult journey from whether as far west as Herat or as far north as Badakhshan into Pakistan by foot, even in some cases. Meanwhile, conflict has broken out in that border. Much of the Pakistani military is wreaking havoc inside Afghanistan itself. So in that particular local situation, which always feels like it's very precarious, I'd be curious for your perspectives on what can be done to try and bring calm in those relationships so that the people who are being impacted by this can find a way to have some stability to try and begin rebuilding their lives.
Quick answer, please.
Yes, it's really important for the international community to come, and particularly regions in the world that Muslim countries around the world, to come and bring these parties together to come up with a resolution. Unfortunately, every time there's a conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the people that suffer the most are the civilians, and particularly refugees, who are one of the largest refugee populations in the world is in Pakistan. And so they take it out on those people, and it's incredibly unfortunate, and it's really important for diplomatic efforts to be put in place to ensure that there is some kind of resolution to these issues. Otherwise, it's going to be yet another conflict inside Afghanistan, or involving Afghanistan, unfortunately. And the disproportionate people that are impacted are the women and children at the end of the day.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Madame Dillon to take the floor for 7 minutes, please. Go.
I'll start my questions with Mrs. Faizi. While you mentioned in your testimony, you were speaking about resettlement, and one of the things you said, very interesting and very concerning, we've been seeing it more and more over the past couple of years. You spoke about dangerous narratives taking place, like blaming refugees and immigrants for lack of housing and resources. Why do you think this is? If you can elaborate a little bit on that, please. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I think when times get tough, usually the immigrants and refugees are scapegoated for a lot of problems that are occurring. And in Canada, the problems in terms of housing and social systems cannot be attributed to refugees and immigrants. That these are more systemic and structural problems that need to be addressed in that way. So some of the problems include high rent, in terms of stagnant wages, and these underlying systemic issues need to be dealt with to ensure that, refugees and immigrants are not blamed or scapegoated for lack of attention to these kinds of policies by our governments.
Thank you so much. My next question will be to Mrs. Clark-Kazak. You were talking a little bit about the number of refugees in the millions. Have you noticed that there's a larger displacement of those internal or external in the past years?
So as our UNHCR colleagues mentioned, in terms of refugees, the number has gone down a little bit because of the resolution or partial resolution of what's happening in Syria. But in terms of internal displacement, we have still large numbers of people. And I think that a lot of the international focus is on refugees because they cross international borders. But in fact, more people are internally displaced. And the problem with internal displacement is that it's their own national governments who are supposed to be taking care of them because they're citizens, but often the governments are themselves the source of insecurity, or they're unable to be able to provide that kind of human rights protection.
That was actually going to be my next question to you about internal displacement. What does that look like in any given country, or is it different for every country?
It's different for each country because it depends really on the country conditions. So in some cases, it's because of civil war or conflict. So for example, Sudan. In other cases, you have a combination, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, of both unrest and human rights violations, but also natural disasters. So Afghanistan has also been hit by earthquakes and other natural disasters that then displace people. And in some cases, like Gaza, for example, you have an external force that's causing internal displacement, and they're trapped there because they cannot get out of the country, of Gaza.
Thank you so much. And my next question will be for Mrs. Malfair. Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned 117 million displaced people. Does that include also the internal, or it's okay? And you spoke about, and we also have been hearing testimony in this committee about women and girls, and even boys, young boys, facing extreme violence, sexual violence. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yes. Yeah. So when people are making these journeys, as the professor was talking about earlier, there's often a lot of violence and danger involved in the journeys themselves. There's a lot of exploitation that happens along the way. So oftentimes when refugees or IDPs arrive to where they're going, they've faced many, many, many difficulties, often including sexual or gender-based violence. So typically, UNHCR and our partners are there to try and help people, to try and provide medical assistance, to try and provide social support, to try and really help people start to heal. However, as a result of some of the funding cuts that I was speaking about earlier, these services are becoming much, much less available in the world. Just to give you an example that's a little closer to home, at the border with Mexico, where we used to have a big contingent of partners and ourselves there to provide these sort of services, it's very dangerous, the Darien Gap, almost nobody's there anymore because of the cuts to funding. So these services are simply not available there. Survivors need to look further to find any available resources. So it's becoming an aggravated problem around the world.
And in your opinion, and Mrs. Clark-Kazak has mentioned this as well, I don't know if you want to jump in if we have some time after, that a lot of times it's the government that's supposed to be protecting its citizens that does not. And she also mentioned in the Congo mining, and that's causing a lot of displacement. I don't know if you want to answer, Mrs. Clark-Kazak wants to answer a little bit about the situation, for example, in the Congo.
For sexual violence or for what's in particular
the displacement
in the Congo?
From where the mining regions are, and who is causing this displacement? What is the cause?
The displacement in those regions often stems from insecurity. The mining companies come in and provide security for the mines themselves, where their workers are, and the area becomes a lot more lawless because these are already areas where there's resources. That's why the mining companies are there in the first place. So control of these resources is a struggle between gangs, between criminal enterprises, and between lawful states and companies that are lawfully there, right? But it creates a very, very insecure terrain, and people who are already slightly vulnerable or vulnerable at all get preyed upon in these settings much more.
Thank you. And Mrs. Kazak, would you quickly like to add something?
So just to complement what my UNHCR colleague said.
A quick answer, please, because time is off.
Yes,
I give you a
the
few
mining
seconds.
companies also are forcibly displacing communities from the areas where they're conducting the mining. And so this is a context where, in fact, the mining is causing displacement and also feeding into this sort of securitization. And also, as we heard from the previous professor, there's a criminal enterprise that starts because of the instability.
J'invite maintenant M. Brunel-Duceppe à prendre la parole.
I would now ask Mr. Brunel-Duceppe to take the floor for 7 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for appearing today. Mr. O'Day, you weren't able to elaborate on your recommendations. I'd like to give you that chance so that you can enlighten the committee. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will repeat myself, but with more detail. First of all, I'd like to mention the importance of supporting research in order to document these migratory situations, not only in Central America, but in the other areas colleagues have mentioned. We can work faster than some institutions. It will help institutions after respond more quickly to certain situations. We need solid data because this area is now wide open to criminality. Now protection has become a diplomatic lever, and I believe that the work of this committee today is a good demonstration of the interest being taken in this issue. Now, with respect to human rights, we've seen examples, and my colleagues have mentioned them, not only protecting unaccompanied women and children, because there are systems of violence against women and children. They can be sexual, kidnapping, digital extortion, etc. Third, we have to support the efforts in these regions in order to reduce violence and the impunity that accompanies it. There is a real criminal industry, and violence is their main means of production. So there is the whole issue of safety and also a strategy of forced displacement throughout the region. And I'll take advantage, we're talking about the very positive role played by the Embassy of Canada in the embassies of Canada in the region. And finally, I would strongly recommend that Canada does not unwittingly reinforce these criminal activities, that they deal with the on-the-ground reality of these communities. And Canadian assistance has to be directed to stabilize and not to be a kind of fuel to a criminal activity, because when the factor of insecurity, corruption, extortion will dominate and will dominate the use of funds. Question: if I understand your fourth recommendation, you said that their economic growth is not only a sign of the improvement in the standard of living, but with the governments now in place, which want to link trade and humanitarian assistance, I think some might say that this is an approach doesn't really do what it should do for humanitarian assistance. Yes, I think it's important to state certain gradations of meaning. There are contexts in which armed groups, criminal groups are present, and that economic development and development assistance, infrastructure investment assistance can sometimes fuel a criminality. These things don't necessarily have a stabilizing influence, but can rather fuel organized crime, which will take advantage of the economy and even generate increased immigration. Now, I'm talking about Central America in particular, but this can be the case everywhere, because once criminals take possession of a region, they can use the entire local economy, including international assistance. So, depending on the sector, there are criminals or criminality present. Now, the way humanitarian assistance works, sometimes, and my colleagues have talked about this, there's protection rackets. There are times when there aren't even malicious actors, but the assistance may not have the necessary impact or the desired impact. Now I would invite Ms. Veldenbelt to take the floor.
Thank you very much to all of our witnesses. I'd like to start my questions with you, Ms. Mulfair. You said that this past year, there has been a slight decline. But if you take Syria out of the equation, then what are we actually looking at in terms of numbers?
If you take Syria out of the equation, we're looking at somewhere between 1 and 2 million, and most of these, unfortunately, are people who were either pushed back to their countries or left because it just became so unwelcoming where they were refugees. The countries I'm talking about are Sudan, they're Afghanistan, which we've already heard about from Asma. You know, people are being pushed back from both Iran and Pakistan. So Syria is the bright spot, like I said, but the rest is less bright.
And I'd like to delve a little bit more into what you were saying about the preference for people is always to want to return home. We talk about the numbers of people who are displaced, leaving their countries, but what are the numbers for people who are returning? Are there certain areas other than Syria where we do see returns, but returns to safety, not returns because they're being forced back? Looking at we're looking at a lot of the current ones, Sudan and Afghanistan, but there's obviously long-time displacements. I'm thinking the Rohingya and others who aren't discussed as much anymore, but are still outside of their home country and displaced. So if you could just give us a little bit of a sense about the numbers that are returning and the numbers that for long, long periods are not able to return with no foreseeable future of being able to return, and where these areas are in the world.
So when we talk about the numbers of return, we're talking both about refugees and IDPs, right? So that number has gone down by 5.4 million this year. When you talk about IDPs and refugees, right? And these are people that have gone back to their homes. Now, 3 million of that is Syria. And the others I've already discussed. So unfortunately, we don't have so many large success stories these days. Conflicts are protracted and don't become resolved, which is why I also spoke about the way to actually stop displacement and to have people return home is peace. It's working on the root causes, like Gary said. And that's really where we need to go, because many, many people are remaining in displacement for longer and longer periods of time. And if we don't address that, people are going to continue to move.
And I wonder, because it isn't, it's intuitive to me, but not necessarily to everybody who's watching, this link between development, conflict prevention, and migration and refugees, so that, the idea that if there is, in fact, sufficient development, not just humanitarian aid, but development, that could actually have a huge impact in terms of the numbers of refugees that are arriving, not just to neighboring countries, but also distantly, Europe, North America. If you could maybe delve a little bit more into that connection between aid and migration.
Sure. I think right now we're watching it unfold in Syria, actually, where we've seen people, over 3 million people have gone back to their communities. Now, they're not going back to functioning communities. They're not going back to houses that were as they left them. In many instances, they're having to dispute if they're even their houses because other people have occupied them, right? So this is where the development community and the humanitarian community really needs to come together, and both need to be funded to do this, obviously. But if you work on the development side, can work on the reconstruction, can work on the schools, so children can enter into schools, can work on ensuring there are roads. Very basic things. And then the humanitarians can really help people with the kind of more direct social network building. And if we don't succeed in this in Syria, people may move again. And the millions and millions of people who are outside of the country won't return.
And in fact, that is also conflict prevention in terms of the next.
Thank you.
Of course, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Vandenberg. And I would like to invite Ms. Tamara Kranis to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Mulfair, I'd like to start with you. You made you've spoken eloquently about how important the funding that Canada provides is to your organization. And of course, we know that there's $2.7 billion of cuts in foreign aid coming to sort of this global space. And there's, of course, in Canada, the full range of views about that, whether it's too much or too little or not enough or not at the right time. And I'd like to ask you a few questions around the communications around that. So the cuts have been announced. Do you have any sense of how they're going to work in practice?
No, not at this point in time. We understand that, same as you, there will be cuts, and we have had meetings with the governments. We work very closely with the government of Canada. Obviously, it's a big partner. But we don't have clarity on what exactly that will mean in terms of the cuts.
And have there been any sort of principles provided to you in terms of the way that indicating in any kind of way that the cuts will be made along any particular kind of value system or sense of any sort of criteria?
We have heard, which I think is also in the press, that it will be linked closer to trade in some ways. We don't know what that means, is trying to link the goals together with trade and development. So I think we are waiting as well to hear what that'll mean, but that is about as much clarity as I have at this point in time.
And just when you say you've heard, did you hear that from the government or through the grapevine?
Both.
So when Secretary of State Sarai was, I think, before the Foreign Affairs Committee, I was there, and I asked him a series of questions. Also got the sense, by the way, that it is going to be around trade. But I asked him a series of questions around how the measurement would happen, like when they start talking about return on investment for foreign aid dollars, which I think we all have our own personal opinions about the appropriateness of that. And when they talk about that, have you gotten any sense that they're putting key performance indicators into place, or that they're going to be measuring that in any kind of systemic and predictable way?
Not at this point, no, we don't.
And so I guess I would ask, what does that mean? What does that mean for your organization in terms of planning and in terms of the work that you do?
I mean, it's challenging. It's challenging because the entire humanitarian funding landscape has shifted substantially, since the last year. And the shift happened very quickly, and not just Canada. I'm talking about worldwide. Mm-hmm. And we're still trying to figure out what that means. We do know that many countries have shifted towards defense and put funding there. At the expense of the humanitarian and development funding. I'm not saying Canada has done that, but we have seen that in other countries. But very few kind of guidelines or performance indicators or things have been, shared to understand how we would be expected to adapt to that.
And do you have any sense of a timeline for the government around when they're going to figure this out, or any kind of indication that there's any kind of guidance coming beyond an announcement?
I do believe there will probably be some guidance, but no, we do not have a timeline for that.
So thanks very much for that. I appreciate your candor on that. And I'd like to move to Ms. Faizi. to ask you the same questions. You've gotten an indication that Canada is stepping back. Do you have any sense where the cuts are going to be made, or whether they're going to be made based on any sort of principles?
Well, I mean, one of the major problems is that the cuts are being made at all different levels. So as I mentioned, it's being made at the private sponsorship level, even government sponsorship. Government-assisted refugees are being, numbers are being reduced. So it's not clear in terms of, and I think on the temporary workers, all of the numbers are being reduced. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that I think one of the underlying problems is the immigration levels, in that if those levels were to have been increased, then we would be able to bring in more people from all of these different groups that are being impacted.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Conness. Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Everything we've heard from all witnesses has been extremely interesting. Mr. O'Day, I think that we can certainly say that there are real weaknesses with respect to the humanitarian crisis. When we talk about the movement of populations, internal displacement, how should we change our approach? Because clearly there are weaknesses. Well, the first thing is that humanitarian assistance cannot prevent migration with the systems that we know of today and what we're discussing today. It does not have this power. It's not a question so much of resources, but migration, not forced migration in some cases, people who are fleeing a war or certain economic conditions that are extremely precarious, climate conditions. Some people flee these regions, and the humanitarian response is to support and help these populations. So to answer your question simply, I would say that if there's one way of going about things, but if there is some way of getting these people to not leave or to slow down the flow, well, and we know that the majority of people who leave want to go back, want to return home. What we could do is to reduce violence. Now, I'm talking here about Canada. Canada could be a proactive player, a proactive actor in these situations. We can look at Haiti, where there are situations in which we could reduce violence. We could try to reduce impunity, fight against impunity, and create a situation where there is local stability so that international assistance can have a real impact. And in my answer, I'm separating development aid, which is long-term aid, and humanitarian assistance, which is meant to help migrating populations. I don't think any interveners have ever claimed that they could keep people from leaving international assistance in the in today's economy it's so much smaller. There are so few resources, but we could at least bring a minimum of support. But the problems of displacement, the political issues. There are problems with respect to regional conflicts. There's a problem of corruption, and the whole criminal system, which has taken control of territories, and we have to. And this is what generates this displacement. So there's clearly a real business in some areas, real criminal business. On the other hand, there is legislation, or there are agreements which seem to favor criminal activity. in the Safe Third Country Agreement, it seems that people have gotten into Canada irregularly, and after 14 days, well, they can ask for asylum. But there are people working on both sides of the border who are working advocates for immigrants. They sometimes are members of cartels that are crossing the border and getting even more money from these people who want to leave. And these smugglers, so to speak, these are also people who are pimps, who exploit these young women who are trying to cross during this 14-day period. How could we deal with this problem? Well, it's clear that the issue you're describing has been discussed in the media, and we have learned, or it has been, problems have been exposed, and that any nation, no matter how sovereign, cannot always control everything. And this is organized crime that will enter any free space. You know, what you're describing about Canada, well, this is happening everywhere else. So where local governments can't control their own territory, well, basically, you're conceding this territory to malicious actors, to criminals who will take advantage, who could take advantage and commit extortion. Thank you, sir.
Monsieur le Président, et à tous les témoins d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Chair, and all witnesses.
Country agreements, and it's been mentioned a few times by different panelists. It was initially created in 2004 when things were very different, and it's been maintained since then with a number of different governments. And today we find ourselves in a different reality south of the border. We see a lot of ICE activity, a lot of deep vulnerability for those for migrants and undocumented people, and questionable practices also in terms of dealing with these people, including deportation to Venezuela and other countries. Maybe for UNHCR, but others can also contribute. There are aspects of the Safe Third Country Agreement that allow for suspension in exceptional times. Do you want to share a bit about that? If we find ourselves in that moment right now, and if so, what does the agreement say about suspending certain elements of the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to start with, as you know, the Safe Third Country Agreement is a bilateral agreement. So UNHCR is not a party to the agreement, right? But there is a suspension. Either party can suspend the agreement, and one of the reasons that they would think about doing that is if some of the terms were not as they saw it, right? So it's not really for us to judge that. It's actually for Canada to judge if it is still, or if it's safe to return people to the U.S. at this point in time. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. You've said it very well. These are kind of extraordinary times, and they are different times, and it really requires of Canada an analysis about what is the purpose of this agreement, and what is the partner that we have the agreement with, and what is the best way for us to pursue Canada's obligations to human rights and to pursue our own concerns for the border. The options available to Canada include, as we've just explained, suspension of the full agreement, which in CCR's perspective it's very hard for the government to not reach that conclusion if it looks on the evidence, because the agreement is predicated on a functioning asylum system. And we literally have the head of state in the U.S. having indicated we have put this entire system on hold. So there is no partner right now to say third country agreement. So we could suspend the agreement for a period of time. There are also, under Article 6, there is the possibility to immediately look at, for matters of public policy, exceptions why certain, why people could be admitted for public interest reasons, essentially for public interest reasons. And so while CCR's position is that it actually makes the most sense to suspend the agreement and to allow people to present themselves at ports of entry in order to rely on our very robust system to assess cases on their merits, there is also the option to look at very vulnerable populations who may immediately need access. For example, earlier this year when President Trump indicated that there would only be 2 genders henceforth, and that people who identify as trans people kind of don't exist anymore, there was the immediate option for the Canadian government to say that that article could be used to clarify that people who are making gender-based violence claims or claims on the basis of discrimination and persecution as trans should be allowed to make their claim heard in Canada because they won't be able to be seen at all in the U.S. So we have quite a few options that are available, either a series of vulnerable population short-term exemptions while we consider what to do. But even though we're very conscious that for the government it just feels like a very big decision and not something that they want to face. I believe the latest quote from the minister was, well, we have a plan, so we're sticking to it. But we know that the U.S. is not sticking to that plan. And so I think it's just really a moment for us to ask ourselves, where are we at this moment in history? And in big moments of crisis and history in other places, when countries found themselves beside Nazi Germany, when countries found themselves dealing with complete dictatorships in other countries, you have to make a decision about what kind of neighbor you would be and what kind of border you would have. And I think most people in Canada, and the polling does show us, that most people in Canada feel that people deserve a fair process at the border to be able to make a claim heard. And we feel very strongly that it would need a different orientation of resources, but with a reorientation of resources away from a kind of a prevention mode to a support the system mode, you could have a very orderly process of having claims heard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zubairi. Mr. Majumdar, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
I thought we have a witness that's about to arrive in a second. Yes. There's a
We're waiting for a witness to arrive, please. Brunel.
I would invite Mr. Alexis Brunel to take the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I have a question because earlier I saw you start, Ms. Kazak-Clark, when we talked about the Carney government's vision in terms of international development. I think there is this link between international trade and international assistance. So do you feel, it seemed that you started a bit. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and then I would like to hear some, I think that the object of international development aid should be international development. Now, sometimes there is a link, but trade can provoke displacement, can lead to displacement if companies invest in mines, and this has a negative impact on the environment, because we also talked about internal displacement caused by natural catastrophes, and we observe a link between trade and negative impacts. And quickly, when we're talking about mines, could we talk about Canadian mining companies? Perhaps the Ombudsman, does he have the necessary authority to look into this? Well, yes, we have to be clear when we're looking at our objective. If the objective is development, it doesn't mean putting money into the pockets of Canadian companies. I'd like to add something to this. We've already seen this movie in the 80s and the 90s. A part of our international cooperation and assistance was explicitly tied to our helping the role of companies in developing countries. And when we look at these projects, it's clear that there were no humanitarian, positive humanitarian results. They were using this assistance to get into these communities, and there were even serious problems with violations of human rights. So these Canadian companies had a very negative impact in several countries. So it's not only aid, but it's that we have the legislative framework to make sure these companies are accountable. And this is something for the Ombudsman. And one last thing, the other thing that assistance could accomplish is to not only support development objectives, but to support organizations in communities that promote peace. So there's this whole question of linking development aid to peace. There are groups who work for women in civil society, human rights groups in civil society. And these people are leaders and could talk to us about how we could come to some sort of peace agreements. This happened in Guatemala in the 90s. I think it's important to make sure that assistance does not have negative impacts, as you say. Thank you. Mr. O'Day, in your work, you see trends that may amplify migration over the next decade. I'm thinking of climate change, of the militarization, and of the collapse of certain regimes. Well, yes, everything you said, I think what I would say to that is that the greatest threats that would increase world displacement is connected to the rupture, the cuts to aid. There's a diminishment of European aid, of American aid. We are literally creating more instability, so it's clear that it is not by cutting aid that we can create the conditions that would allow for strong social structures, for democracy. in these emerging societies. I think that these cuts to aid is having an extremely significant impact. I was in Europe recently, and humanitarian associations now are able to fund fewer projects, can invest far less locally. And so people won't have access to help that would help them meet basic needs. So these people will be even more vulnerable to climate conditions, to market conditions that aren't favorable to them, and will also be far more vulnerable to criminals. So yes, there is climate change and other things, and we do observe the new posture of the United States. And plus their cuts to international aid. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Odette. Thank you, Mr. Brunel-Duceppe.
This Foundation, Madame Demont Liu, Director.
Yeah.
Madame, welcome, Madame Liu, to this meeting with us, and we thank you. We understand why you were late, and now you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. Honorable Chairman, honorable members of Subcommittee on International Human Rights, it is an honor to speak before you at the Canadian Parliament. My name is Diamond Liu. My testimony will attempt to explain why China's economic success is built on the backs of the largest number of displaced persons in human history. It is estimated that they range between 300 to 400 millions, equivalent to the total population of the United States being uprooted and forced to relocate. In 1978, when economic reform began, China's GDP was 150 billion US dollars. In 2000, when China joined the WTO, it was approximately 1.2 trillion. China's current GDP is approximately 18 trillion. In 2000, China's manufacturing output was smaller than Italy's. Today, it's larger than America, Europe, Japan, and South Korea combined. If you have ever wondered how China managed to grow so fast in such a short time, Charles Lee, former chief executive of Hong Kong stock market, has the answers for you. He revealed that China owes its farmer a 40-year debt, as he listed 4 reasons that have enabled China's rapid growth. 1, cheapest land. 2, cheapest labor. 3, cheapest capital. 4, a disregard for environmental costs. The cheapest land because the CCP government took the land from the farmers at little to no compensation. The cheapest labor because these farmers, without land to farm, was forced to migrate to the city to find work at the lowest possible wages. The communist household registration system ties them perpetually to rural area. This means they are not legal residents in the urban areas, and they cannot receive social benefit that legal urban residents are entitled to. They live in precarious circumstances because they could be evicted from there at any time. Videos of rural migrants being arrested and abused by urban police are regularly posted on social media. One well-known incident of eviction occurred in November 2017. Chai Qi, now the second most powerful man in China after Xi Jinping, was a municipal official in Beijing. he evicted tens of thousands of rural migrants into Beijing's harsh winter with only days or just moments of notice. Chai-Chi make famous a term which CCP officials often use, low-end population, 低端人口, which exposes official contempt towards rural migrants they treat as second-class citizens. This displaced migrant workers have one tradition which they hold dear. It is to reunite with their family during the Chinese Lunar New Year holidays. Making this seasonal migration of about 100 to 150 million people a spectacular event to behold. In China's economic winter of 2025, with waves of bankruptcy and factory closure, the tide of unemployment, migrant workers returning home early to where there is also no work and no land to farm, has become instead a worrisome event to the authorities. Historically, in the last 2,000 years, social instability has caused the collapse of many ruling regimes in China. The cheapest capital is acquired through predatory banking practices, and another means is through the stock market. First, to rake in the savings of Chinese people, and later to rake in international investment by listing opaque and sometimes state-owned enterprises in leading stock markets around the world.
I'd like to wrap it up, please, because time is over.
Okay. I'll read the concluding statement. Chinese Communist officials often laud the system of government as superior. The renowned essayist Qin Hui has written that Chinese Communist government enjoy the human rights abuse advantage. This is true. By abusing its own people so brutally, the Chinese Communist regime has created an image of success, which will prove to be a mirage. For those who are still supportive of the CCP regime in China, I have a message. If you think the CCP will treat foreigners better than its own people when the CCP has its power over you, please think again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Liu. And now I would like to invite Mr. Majumdar to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And Diamond Liu, thank you for being here. I appreciate the weather and the airport troubles, and appreciate your statement, very strong one as it was. You started off by saying 300 to 400 million people internally displaced inside China. That is a massive movement of humanity. Why is it that we, in the outside world, know so little about this massive internal displacement that's happening?
It's because the nature of China policy. Great Britain, the British Empire, adopted a commercial approach to its China policy, beginning in 1793. Is aiming to open the vast China market to make vast amount of profit. They do not see Chinese people as human beings, only as either workers or consumers. And when I was studying in Great Britain, I have run into comments and read in books that a good Chinaman is a dead Chinaman. It is not very humane. So they do not see, not because they don't have eyes, but they are wearing goggles or dollar signs. They do not see.
Thank you for that. And when you think about the next couple of periods of time, whether it's the next quarter or two, the winter this year and the spring next year, as the Chinese economy worsens, what kind of implications will these consequences of internal displacement have upon the CCP in Beijing?
For 2,000 years, social instability in China has caused the collapse of many ruling regimes in China. And at this moment, Xi Jinping would either initiate a war because he needs a war economy, or the CCP regime would collapse under the weight of social instability. Is 50-50.
We're talking about very significant consequences for what that might mean for this geography of Asia, and for where the people of Asia may end up as a result of this, especially from China internally and externally. That's a massively unstable event. When you take a step back, why have these massive human rights abuses in China worked so advantageously for the CCP for so long?
Again, because the commercial approach to China policy, which unfortunately the world has adopted from the British model, is because they want to make profits. For instance, they committed the June 4 Beijing massacre. Within the month, Scowcroft went to Beijing to make nice with the butcher of Beijing, assure Beijing that most favored nation status is safe. So they see that they can kill and they can murder and they can abuse. The Western democracy are still supporting them by opening their markets, giving them money, and giving them prestige. President Trump is going to China to meet with Xi Jinping, who's on the verge of either collapsing or initiating war.
Okay. Is that my time? 30 seconds. Not too much time. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Civilized societies are based on values. And if democracy is competing with tyranny on interests, as is doing now, they would lose. If democracy is competing with tyranny on values, democracy will win.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Liu. I invite Ms. Dillon to take the floor for 3 minutes this round, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Mrs. Malfair. We were talking a little bit about statistics. Can you talk to us about how many women and children are displaced out of the sum you've mentioned?
I don't know the exact number.
Question is for
Mrs. Malfair.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay, no problem. I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but typically it's over 60% of the displaced are women and children.
Women and children.
Yes.
So they're very vulnerable to trafficking. And
100%. They're usually the most vulnerable, right?
Okay.
I mean, in certain situations, up to half of the displaced people are children. This was the case in Lebanon, where I last was 3 years ago.
Yes.
I understand it's also the case in the Sudan conflict. So.
And both were internally displaced, or also trying?
No, in Lebanon it was refugees.
Yes.
In Sudan it's both internally displaced and refugees.
Okay. And we've been speaking about climate change, and there are certain criteria to be a refugee: race, religion, nationality, membership in a group, or political opinions. What different types of refugees are there these days with the evolution of technology and, I guess, climate change? Can you talk to us about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, these things don't often, most of the time, don't happen in a vacuum, right? The biggest displacement crises over 80% of them are climate vulnerable countries. We're talking about Afghanistan, we're talking about Sudan, we're talking about Syria. All of these are climate vulnerable countries anyway. So it's an exacerbation. Quite often what happens is, you know, a climate event happens and, you know, people may move temporarily. Violence, other things happen, people move usually for a little bit longer term, but usually we don't see these things isolated incidents, right? And if it is an isolated climate incident, often people will return faster if the development assistance and the rebuilding happens. The more protracted situations are often the violence, the persecution that we're talking about here.
So basically something that has continued for decades and decades, the political violence. And
Exactly. Again, the solution is the root causes and peace, as we keep coming back to today.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of
Thank you,
time.
Ms. Dillon. I invite Mr. Amarjit Gill to take the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Thanks to all witnesses coming here for their testimony. My question to Ms. Liu, in your opinion, would you say Canada has done enough work in helping displaced person in China?
I don't even think most human rights activists are aware of the situation, and certainly most governments don't. And I don't think anything has been done for them.
And what are the next steps forward you think that should have been taken?
Well, the first step is to gain knowledge. Without knowledge, there's very little we can do. The second is that our human rights policy cannot just be virtue signaling. They have to be effective. And for instance, for now, human rights policy in most Western countries are focusing on the periphery of China, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. The peripheral are important, and Xinjiang people are being abused very badly. But they only comprise of less than 5% of China's population. When the Soviet Union had its captured nation approach, the captured nation comprised about 60% of the population. 5% of the population is not going to move China. So you have to adopt the correct policy. You have to move from a commercial approach to a China policy. Without doing those two, there's very little that can be done. But it is the Chinese people who have the numbers to overwhelm the guns. They can bring down an abusive regime, and they have done so for 2,000 years. The Confucian tradition gave the Chinese people the right to rebel, which is popularly known as the mandate of heaven. They can withdraw their consent to be ruled, but not when the Western democracy continuously subsidizing the tyranny regime in China, propping them up, as George Bush Sr. did, as Bill Clinton did, as Richard Nixon did, as Obama did, as Biden did.
Okay, please wrap it up. Time is over.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Audet,
Thank you, Chair. Mr. O'Day, without research, we wouldn't have landed on the moon. We couldn't have a committee with video conference. Can you please explain to the committee and to our analysts who will be drafting a report, how research can make a difference at the present time in the migratory crises around the world. Can you tell us how research can make a difference? Answer. Thank you very much for allowing me to answer this question. And it is part of my recommendations. To answer simply, I would say that this helps at least 3 levels. First, there is a partnership research. I see that you've talked to representatives of certain organizations. There is a rigorous protocol, but it cannot take place without partnerships, alliances with organizations that have privileged access to facts on the ground. We work with these organizations in order that our research can be based on tangible humanitarian practices and can be utilitarian. They help us. We also help these organizations, and we also help governments, so that public policies can be more effective in order that these organizations' programs can respond to the needs of people who are going through extraordinary tragedy. And again, another thing is that basic research is important because there is a real gap between how problems are changing, how the facts on the ground are changing. I go to Central America 3 to 4 times a year, and at every time the context has changed. Maybe a border has been closed. There's been a natural catastrophe. So we have to be aware of natural catastrophes and humanitarian crises in real time so that public policies and organizations can respond to the needs of people involved. And in democracies, we want our policies to be based on science and conclusive facts. And all my colleagues, all Canadian researchers, are engaged in applied research in the humanitarian space. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here, to have policies that are based on daily realities. So this is why academic research is important. Thank you. You answered perfectly. Thank you, sir. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony. Our study of internally and externally displaced persons.
All the members, analysts, the clerk, all the staff, and the interpreter, we would like to thank you. Thank you for your presence, for your good introduction, good answer to question, enlightening this committee. Meeting is suspended.
Merci.